Part 20. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 197. Subai didn't ask what the monk was busy with in Qinhuangdao. The monk had approached Subai about this matter, but Subai still refused. Even though the monk had just given himself an exclusive spiritual massage yesterday, Subai still refused. He planned to ask the monk what exactly you were busy with and if you needed help, because Subai knew that even when there was no interest, the monk was still a good monk with a kind face and kind eyes. However, when there was a conflict of interests, the monk fell out and really disowned his relatives. Typical. Subai was not very interested in seafood, and Qinhuangdao's tourism industry was relatively prosperous recently, so there were a lot of people. Some of the better restaurants had too many customers, so Subai was too lazy to go, so he made a bowl of noodles on the street. After eating, he planned to take the high-speed train back to Beijing or Tianjin, and then back to Shanghai. After all, the little one was still in Shanghai. Although Jixiang was watching and taking care of him, Subai didn't have to worry too much, but he didn't really feel like he was there after he came out of the story world. She wanted to spend more time with him. For Subai, who really regarded the little guy as his own son, he really experienced the torture of a parent missing his child. Subai had actually decided in his heart that if he had to continue to live in this mode of horror broadcasts in the future, he would not have any children of his own. It would be good to have a little guy. Even if he died, Subai also believed that the little guy could survive well on his own. Otherwise, once he left behind a woman who gave birth to a child for him and his own blood. On the contrary, it's troublesome. The little guy has a special relationship with Subai. He was brought out of the story world by Subai. Subai hopes that he can live like a normal person in the future, even if he is gone. Perhaps, my nature is still selfish, because I don't want my direct relatives to become orphans like myself after I have a child. However, there is one thing that needs to be done quickly. The little guy has to give a name to his household registration, and then apply for an adoption certificate. These are actually not difficult for Subai. In fact, in China, most local agencies handle matters. It is very convenient for people with connections and influence, but Subai feels that naming the little one and registering it is more serious and solemn. He can't call someone to do it, he still has to do it himself. Well, after all, there isn't much that I can do for him. My two cheap parents left so simply, and the wealth they left behind became bigger and bigger like a snowball. Unfortunately, their son seemed to have no luck in it for the rest of his life. Fortunately, he also had a cheap grandson. The little guy still needs to be named Su. What surprised Subai was that the noodle shop he found seemed to have a nice decoration and was on the petit bourgeois route, but this noodle shop was indeed a bit unflattering. After 2 bites, he really couldn't eat it anymore, so Subai had to checked out and walked out. No matter what, since I came all the way to this coastal city, I always need a solid meal. Just behind the noodle shop, there was a vegetarian restaurant that looked like a temple. Subai walked in. The busy waiters inside were all young novice monks. There was a middle-aged monk with a shiny face sitting in front of the cashier. He didn't know who he was. Special theme restaurants are really a temple industry. Hey, donor, which set meal do you want? The monk was very enthusiastic when he saw Subai coming in. There are many set meals posted on the wall, all of which are vegetarian. Subai ordered a set meal and sat down at an empty seat. Although the monk at the cash register was a little smooth and sophisticated, which was very different from the image of an eminent monk like Kilu, the vegetarian meal was very well done. It was all vegetarian, but it was very tasty. This made Subai feel very satisfied. Satisfied, after all, I didn't come to the temple to burn incense, but just to eat. While we were eating, 3 more customers came outside. One was quite fat, and the other 2 were very thin, and their faces did not look very healthy. They must have been in a state of day and night for a long time. The three of them came in and all ordered the cheapest vegetarian meal. This kind of vegetarian meal is a large quantity type that basically makes no money. The monk in front of the cashier seemed very unhappy, but he still shouted loudly. Kitchen preparation. The three people were sitting diagonally opposite Subai. After sitting down, the three people actually took out their fists and gathered together. One of them took out his mobile phone with his other hand to take pictures, and at the same time shouted. 3 to 5 bottles. Force 2 punches. It's fate to fight more and fight less. It was like a cult, so Subai didn't pay much attention. Maybe 3 middle-aged men came over to have a meal and play games or something. When he had almost eaten, he drank a bowl of soup, and Subai took the bowl. I put my chopsticks away and stood up to pay. A young novice monk came over with a list. When he saw Subai eating the vegetarian meal, he looked surprised and clasped his hands together and said, "Donors cherish blessings." Subai also smiled. This is actually a rule for eating vegetarian meals in the temple. There must be no leftovers in the rice bowl and plate. If a little bit is left over, you will lose the blessings you have thrown away. A true monk is very pay attention to cherishing blessings. When I was a child, my mother believed in Buddhism and often took Subai to the temple to pray for blessings and eat vegetarian food. She was very particular about this when eating. Of course, the commercialization of temples at that time was not so serious, and the monks were still very particular about these things. Most temples today are no longer like this. Damn it, many temples are like vegetarian food stalls, they don't care whether customers eat more or less and have leftovers. The little novice monk couldn't help but feel happy when he saw Subai eating so cleanly. In Subai's eyes, he was really cute and simple. Such a child was really delayed when he was left here to visit restaurants. It was a pity that he was not a monk. And the kilo monk probably has no interest in recruiting disciples. After paying the bill, Subai walked out of the vegetarian restaurant and planned to take a taxi directly to the train station, but Subai suddenly realized that he was being followed. It's a bit interesting for 3 people to follow one person, and the tracking method is very low level and crude. It is estimated that ordinary people who are more careful can detect this, let alone people like Subai. Suddenly I felt like I couldn't laugh or cry. Could it be that I was going to be robbed again today? However, Subai still deliberately leaned to the side of the road. He didn't want to cause trouble, and he was too lazy to deal with a few stupid thieves. Subai was not that boring. A taxi stopped in front of Subai, and Subai got in the car. After the car started, Subai saw the 3 guys still standing on the side of the road, with a look of resentment on their faces. They were obviously a little regretful that the fat sheep in their mouth had escaped, but they were also a little relieved. Obviously, I just got together and haven't really opened a business yet, so I still have an instinctive fear of this kind of business. It's like the first time for a boy or a girl. I always feel that after the first time is gone, I won't be able to do it anymore. He is no longer his old self. Those 3 have very open foreheads and narrow lower pelvises. They look like they are leaking money, and their faces are dark and circled. It is estimated that they will be jailed in the near future. It must be a few gamblers who lost a lot of money and decided to take risks. They were also blind and found you. The taxi driver joked while honking his horn to urge the battery cars in front to give way. Subai took out his own cigarette and handed one to the front. The driver also held a lighter in one hand to light Subai's cigarette. The 2 of them went back and forth, and soon, everyone had a cigarette in their mouths. A lit cigarette. "Thank you." Subai blew out a smoke ring and said. "Thank you. Actually, I didn't expect you to come out alive. The next shuttler after Chen Yuxin will be you, right?" The driver turned the steering wheel with one hand and held a cigarette with the other. "It's me," Subai replied. "Then you are pretty lucky. Chen Yuxin got one more vote than you that time." It was a mistake by those people. You should be the sure winner in the next round of voting, unless something like that happens that can overturn everything. A huge change in people's concepts. Because of the reason for your death, the story rules arranged for you to die in the scene after Chen Yuxin died. So in the next round of voting, although I was the highest vote, the story rules determined that this round of immortality, I was lucky enough to survive one more round. Haha, that's really good luck. The driver stepped on the brakes and stopped at a traffic light intersection to wait for the light to turn green. I couldn't say too much at the beginning. I could only say it in a vague way, otherwise my voice would be changed by the rules of the story. The words changed their meaning. In fact, I didn't expect you to understand anything at that time. However, after all, it is only because of you that I can complete the task so easily. If I want to kill that woman Chen Yuxin in the hotel or in other scenes, it may not be very easy, and it may even turn out to be, I don't know whether I kill her or she. Fortunately, you made me vote to death. I was really dumbfounded at that time. The life and death opponent I was prepared to face just died like this. I guess she was also very sad. Be depressed. You are very honest, Subai smiled. Tit for tit. You helped me in disguise, and I helped you in disguise. Neither of us owes the other, so when you get to the train station later, you will still have to pay according to the meter. Aren't the people of Qinhuangdao very hospitable? No matter how hospitable you are, you have to eat, the driver replied. We're almost there. We'll be there just around the corner. By the way, why did you want to come to Qinhuangdao? Are you going to travel as soon as you leave the story world? What a good attitude. Subai came forward and patted the driver who was driving on the shoulder. You have been driving a taxi to make money to support your family since you came out of the story world. You seem to have a better mentality than me, right? Qin Yang sighed. Life is not only the broadcast in front of you, but also the fields in the distance. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 198. Qin Yang drove the car to the road in front of Qinhuangdao railway station, pointed to the roadside, and said, "Do you want to buy something to eat and drink to get on the train? The ones at the train station are expensive and not cost-effective." Subai suddenly felt a little smile. "Do you want to be so down to earth?" Qin Yang also laughed himself and waved his hand. "I have a 3-month-old child and a wife who is not in good health. I am used to saving money. Look at the cigarettes I smoke. It's 3 yuan and a half. Bao, how can you be so cool and unrestrained like you? You shouldn't be short of money," Subai said. Yes, although the listeners of the radio are not as eye-catching as the rich and powerful, there is no problem in living a comfortable and prosperous life based on their own abilities and with the tacit approval of the horror radio. I can feel at ease with what I have earned. I use the money I gained from the ability gained from the horror broadcast to spend on my family. I am afraid that they will also suffer from this kind of retribution. I will just bear these things myself. Qin Yang threw the cigarette butt out of the window, looking a little desolate. It was obvious that a man who could suppress his ability and continue to be down to earth in making money to support his family as before, the pressure he endured and his terrible character were really shocking. Subai suddenly thought of his parents, then himself, and then the little guy. Is this a kind of karma? After getting out of the car and waving to Qin Yang, Subai actually walked to the supermarket opposite and bought 2 bottles of water and a stick of chewing gum, and then walked directly across the road to the train station. After getting on the elevator and getting the ticket, Subai sat in the waiting hall and waited. When the time was almost up, Subai was about to get up to check the tickets, but at this moment, he suddenly felt a biting chill deep in his heart, which was even vaguely related to the zombie evil energy in his body. Subai lowered his head silently, covering his distorted expression at this time. The zombie evil spirit in his body suddenly felt like it was boiling for some reason. If Subai hadn't reacted in time and suppressed it with all his strength, It might have changed in front of everyone. Got pregnant. His consciousness began to search and his eyes began to wander. Subai finally discovered the source of the power that affected him. In the restroom, in the waiting room. He stumbled into the toilet, and collided with a few people on the way. Seeing Subai's appearance, those people thought he was ill or addicted to drugs, so they didn't care too much and hurried away. Subai entered the men's room. In the row of squat cubicles, Subai quickly walked to the last position and reached out to open the door, but it was locked from the inside. Without hesitation, Subai immediately raised his foot and kicked it down. Boom! The cubicle door was kicked open, and Subai saw a man lying unconscious in the cubicle. In the man's arms, something was emitting a light visible to the naked eye. The man's body was covered with feces and urine. It was obvious that something happened suddenly while he was having sex. As a result, he didn't even have time to wipe his butt and buttocks. He didn't even realize that he had passed out and was still doing what he did before he passed out. Things. Subai didn't care about the dirt, took the thing out of the man's arms, and then took a few steps back. This is a scroll. When it is opened, it is a very simple portrait. The portrait should be presented in a way similar to ink painting, and it looks antique. What the picture scroll showed was a sea. On the sea, there was a purple moon hanging high. Subai looked at this purple moon, and the evil spirit of the zombies in his body seemed to be even more difficult to control. This purple moon, the purple moon in the painting, it's the source of the evil spirit of the zombies in your body. Fortunately, the morning light is about to appear, the purple moon is slowly dissipating, and the sun is beginning to shine. Subai also breathed a sigh of relief. This picture is extraordinary. This reminded Subai of the demon on the mountain in the world of Mr. Zombie's story. The demon exists in the painting, and the world is established through painting. Although this painting is not as oppressive as the demon's painting, it is obviously not as powerful. It may be completely similar and compared, but being able to draw out the zombie evil energy in one's body so obviously is enough to show how precious it is. Is this what the monk is looking for? Subai smiled slightly. It was really possible. After all, he and the monk saw this painting of the devil together in the last story world. Then the monk might have thought of something, so he came to Kinhuangdao to look for something similar. Forget it, it's easier for me. Subai took his cell phone and took a photo of the man who had passed out in the toilet pit so that he could use his personal connections to check his identity. Then he closed the door of the cubicle and chose to leave. After all, the train has arrived. If you are a little later, you will miss the train. Since it was noon, there were very few passengers on this train, so there were almost no people in the first-class seats of the high-speed train. After waiting for the train to start, Subai opened the water bottle and took a sip of water. Then he took out the painting again. This time, when he unfolded the painting again, the scenery in the painting changed greatly. The sea was calm. The wind is gentle and the sun is beautiful, giving people a refreshing feeling. There are really a lot of weird things in this painting. In the lower right corner of the scroll, there are several seals. One is Zongjengihi, one looks similar to the Japanese seal style, and the other is just a paw print, not like a human trace. Apparently, this means that the painting was once owned by 3 people, plus a collector in Japan. Subai suddenly thought of his old bronze box. The box was finally taken away by the fat man. Subai never asked for it because there was no reason to ask for it. After all, this box almost killed Ninth Brother. At that time, Subai really didn't have the strength to occupy that box, but this painting was something Subai planned to treasure. At this time, Subai's cell phone rang, and it was a WeChat message from the monk. Gone back. Subai's eyes narrowed slightly. It was obvious that there was indeed an accident on the monk's side. It might not have been a personal accident, but the thing he was looking for. An accident occurred. It was not such a coincidence. It seems that this painting, really what a monk is looking for. Subai put the scroll aside and then clicked on a video call request. The monk quickly answered the call. The monk didn't know which dark corner he was in now. The light was not very bright, and there were several wounds on the monk's face. He should have just fought, but it shouldn't be a big problem. The background of Subai's video is the high-speed rail carriage, and he did it on purpose. Are you really just here to talk to a poor monk? The monk felt a little unbelievable when he saw Subai taking the high-speed train back. However, after thinking about it, he felt that it was natural. For Subai, it was natural to go there specifically to find him. It is also in line with his style to give him a spiritual massage and then go back without doing anything else. Nonsense, I have to go back and apply for a lot of documents to register my child's household registration. There are actually quite a lot to do. Amitabha, have a safe journey. The monk said these words to the little guy. The monk and Gyatso had prayed for the little guy before, and he could be regarded as half of the little guy's godfather. The same to you. The two grown men hung up the video call very briefly. Subai put the scroll back into his backpack, then put his hands on his neck, put down the seat, and lay down uncleanly. However, Subai, who seemed to be relaxing, did not relax at all. The guy who brought the scroll and passed out in the toilet because he could not bear the influence of the scroll was obviously an ordinary person. If nothing else, he should be an errand boy. This scroll should not appear on his body. A monk has been working on this scroll for so long. If it falls on an ordinary person and is taken away, it would obviously be an insult to the monk. That guy should just be there to deliver things. It was obvious that in order to cover up the monk's eyes and ears, someone deliberately asked an ordinary person to transfer the painting with him. Since the other party came to the train station, it is obvious that the real person with the monk was in Kinhuangdao. The people vying for this painting should also be at the train station, and may even be on the bus. He was lucky enough to have his beard cut off midway, so Subai had to be prepared to be snatched back. When he returned to Shanghai, everything would be stable. This painting would be placed at home, with auspiciousness watching over it, and he would probably become a monk in the future. Knowing that the scroll is with him, he can't steal it back. However, you must still be more careful now. After all, this is not your home court. At this time, the censor door of this carriage opened by itself, and a man with haggard hair and a t-shirt and shorts walked in while making a phone call. He looked more like he was in the first-class seat. It's impossible to work part-time. It's impossible to work in this life. I don't know how to do business. I have to steal this kind of stuff to survive. Living like this, going to the detention center feels like going home. I'll go back in 1 year. New Year's Eve I didn't go back for 30 nights. I just went back to see if something happened at home. I felt much better in the detention center than at home. It was so boring to be alone at home. Come on, you said you have no money to eat? Okay, leave your card number. I'll close my eyes and press 0. Isn't it a fate to hit more or less? After the man came in, he called loudly and walked past Subai naturally. He saw that Subai had closed his eyes and wore sunglasses, and he must have fallen asleep. The other person's breathing was also steady, and then he continued to call loudly, and then walking behind Subai's seat, he stretched out his hand suddenly and lifted up Subai's backpack that was placed next to him in an extremely fast and skillful manner. He was overjoyed and turned around to leave. Who knew that he had just when he raised his head, he found that his eyebrows were cold, and the Hellfire shotgun was already pressed against his forehead. I said, "Brother, do you bring cost props with you when you go out?" Subai smiled slightly. Then pulled the trigger. Boom. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 199. Subai fired the shot very resolutely and decisively, without any hesitation at all. The other party didn't seem to expect that Subai would be so direct, shooting without saying a word. The power of the Hellfire shotgun is naturally very terrifying, but this person who originally looked carefree suddenly changed his style at this moment. He immediately opened his mouth, and a silver snake appeared from his mouth. The head of the snake spit out the letter, and the body of the snake stretched out, but was still directly beaten to pieces by the Hellfire shotgun. However, the beaten body turned into a ball of silver light, wrapping his whole body, and shot the Hellfire shotgun. The remaining power of this shot of the gun was removed. Hello. The other party obviously planned to shout. However, the next moment, the other party discovered that Subai actually had his eyes closed. Damn thief, you dare to steal my things, I am very angry, I want to kill you thief, this backpack contains souvenirs left by my mother for me, full of my memories, I am very angry, I am very sad, I can't help myself, I want to kill you. I was desperate and blinded by anger. Other side. Facing Subai's serious words with closed eyes and talking to himself, the other party obviously felt a deep malice. Of course he knew why Subai said such things stupidly, and he also knew that Subai did this. What is the meaning of so cruel? In fact, from the beginning, when the other party was about to steal his bag, Subai, who seemed to be in a nap, had made all preparations. When the other party picked up his bag, Subai took out his gun in an instant, and then directly the trigger was pulled. Subai would not simply think that the other party was just a thief. There were surveillance cameras everywhere on the high-speed railway. It was a bit stupid to steal things here. Moreover, it was not such a coincidence. He had just taken the monk and someone who had been fighting for it in Kinhuangdao. Once the items were cut off, thieves immediately attracted them. In addition, Subai's clothes and grooming are not from high-end brands. He doesn't look much different from an ordinary college student. Is there anything worth paying attention to? Of course, although Subai knew in his heart that the other party was the audience, he couldn't shout out. According to the regulations of terrorist broadcasting, attacking another listener for no reason in the real world will cause huge causal backlash. Now Subai just closed his eyes and ignored it, convinced that he was just because a thief stole something. So he started to take revenge out of anger. Even if this is very deceptive. Even if it's fake. But Subai really didn't want to be tainted with too much karma. In the last story world, Subai had already felt the care taken by terror broadcasting in the story world after completing his real-life mission. Naturally, he knew that if he was tainted with too many karma, cause and effect, the next story world itself will not be so comfortable. Although the other audience member stole his things, he actually had a causal relationship with him. It was reasonable for Subai to take action against him. However, Subai was used to being cautious. Except for occasionally flipping the table without hesitation when he was sick, Subai usually still pays great attention to such details. Boom. 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 3 more shots were fired in succession. Facing the Hellfire shotgun blast at such a close range, the opponent blocked with both fists and actually assumed a military fist stance. A faint layer of brilliance condensed around his body, forcefully he blocked the first 2 shots, but when it came to the third shot, the opponent really couldn't block it. He was blown away, smashing several seats, and fell to the ground. His chest heaved and vomited from his mouth. A mouthful of blood. Stop fighting, I'll obey, I'll obey. The other party immediately shouted. Subai gritted his teeth and continued to hold up the gun. Listening to the other party's voice, he continued to move the muzzle of the gun. You're still here? Do you really want to fight to the death? The other party punched the window of the high-speed train. The originally strong high-speed train window was directly smashed, and then he jumped directly from the speeding high-speed train. This is not the train from the railway guerrilla days. This is a high-speed train. If you jump out at such a high speed, the inertia will be terrible. Even the listeners may die accidentally. Sudbai finally opened his eyes this time, put away the gun, lifted up the backpack that was left on the side, looked at the mess caused by the shooting, left the car and went to the middle. What happened here? Don't worry too much about the publicity, the horror broadcast will probably wipe your ass off. Sudbai just stood in the aisle in the middle of the car. Not long after, Beijing arrived and Sudbai got off the car. In the past few days, the weather in Beijing was good and the sun was shining brightly. Sudbai took the subway and went to the capital international airport with his bag in hand. Along the way, Sudbai was very calm, but also extremely careful. Before arriving in Shanghai and putting things in front of Jixiang at home, Sudbai had to be absolutely careful. Since this picture had been fought over by the guy and the monk for so long, it must be of great use, and it's magical, Sudbai has seen it before. Since the thing fell into his own hands, he naturally had no reason to throw it out again. At the Capital International Airport, Sudbai ordered a cup of coffee and a snack. He still put his bag next to him and quietly waited for the boarding time. There were many people coming and going around. Sudbai didn't think there was anything wrong with being a warrior. Even before he boarded the plane, Sudbai wasn't surprised at all when the monk appeared in front of him. The ability of the audience could not be analyzed with ordinary people's thinking and concepts, and it was also possible to compete for it. The people in this scroll are not just the monk and that person, there are probably others. "Sir, do you need a refill?" a waiter came over and asked with a smile. Sudbai shook his head, indicating that he didn't need it. At this moment, Sudbai suddenly felt a warm feeling coming from his backpack. Sudbai suddenly grabbed the backpack with one hand and walked out directly. Coffee shop and headed to the toilet. The temperature of the scroll continued to rise. At this time, Sudbai suddenly understood why the errand boy took the scroll to the toilet, because the scroll actually started to smoke again. It's not the smoke of a fire, but curls of green smoke, which is really eye-catching in places like train stations and airports where people are densely packed and security is relatively high. Sudbai also walked into the cubicle where he was squatting, but after learning from the past, Sudbai really didn't dare to go for a convenience at this time, so he just quickly took out the scroll from his backpack. The portrait in the scroll is at noon, with the red sun hanging overhead, and the seawater seems to have been evaporated and become a little lifeless. Now, the scroll is already a little hot in his hand, as if he is holding a glass filled with boiling water, and it is getting worse. Sudbai is really worried that it will become like a soldering iron in the future. Temperature. Hiss. This is troublesome, how can you bring it on the plane like this? Others may have thought that they made homemade explosives and lit the fuse on the plane to prepare to blow themselves up. Sudbai felt a little troubled for a moment, but there seemed to be no one more bachelor than Sudbai. The next moment, he walked directly to the pool outside, turned on the water, and then rinsed the scroll under the water to cool down. This kind of thing shouldn't rot like ordinary scrolls when exposed to water, Sudbai thought in his heart. Of course, when ordinary people get a treasure of this level, they would naturally hold it in their hands for fear of dropping it and hold it in their mouths for fear of it melting. Only Sudbai dared to wash it with tap water. Sudbai soon discovered an anomaly. The water rushing in from the tap did not fall down, but merged into the scroll. After the temperature of the scroll returned to normal, Sudbai unfolded the scroll again and found that the scene in the scroll had turned into a downpour. Heavy rain fell from the sky, and the sun was completely obscured by dark clouds. It's really interesting. Sudbai put the scroll back into his backpack and walked out of the toilet. After a lot of trouble, the other side also started to remind him to get ready to board the plane. Sudbai walked over with his bag on his back. This was not to study the secrets of the scroll. It is a good place. When I return to Shanghai and my home, I will have a lot of time to take a closer look at the mystery of this thing. It is worth the monk and the others fighting openly and secretly in Qinhuangdao for so long. After getting on the plane took off quickly. Sudbai's heart, which had been vigilant, slowly dropped at this time. No matter what, Sudbai still didn't believe that the monks would fly into the sky to grab things. Although the audience's abilities were exaggerated in the eyes of ordinary people, they were far from superhuman. "Sir, what would you like to drink?" Two stewardesses came over pushing a drink trolley. "Mineral water, thank you." After receiving a glass of water, Sudbai pulled open the shelf in front of him, and then spread out the painting. At this time, the plane also flew over the clouds, and the bright sunlight shone down. It was very dazzling, but also very comfortable. Sudbai did not pull down the sun visor like others, but left it open. The bright sunlight also shone on the scroll, and the picture of heavy rain started to change again. Sudbai picked up the cup and took a sip of water, quietly waiting for its changes. What he was thinking about was that if the scroll had no other special effect on him, or for someone like him who didn't understand metaphysics and didn't know magic. If it cannot be used, it would be good to leave it as a toy for the little ones, but it is much more interesting than a reading machine. However, soon, Sudbai's hand holding the cup suddenly trembled, because an unexpected picture appeared in the scroll. In the picture, there is no longer the sea or the heavy rain, but a crisp meadow. As far as the eye can see, it is all comfortable green. On a small green slope, a woman and a boy are sitting together on the grass, full of mother and child. Sudbai's hands began to tremble, and his lips turned slightly white. This painting. He met him in his office at Edwards Research Laboratory in London. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 200. Grandpa Edward likes the painting in the study very much. In fact, I also like it very much. However, don't you think? Does that little boy's back look somewhat similar to yours? In Sudbai's mind, he recalled what the Lolita, no, that damn brain pretended to be a Lolita, said to him when he was at the Edward Institute of Psychology in London. She knew herself because when she was taking revenge on herself, she said that all the pain she had suffered at the hands of her father would now be returned to her as her son. Therefore, that brain, or that she, has a connection with the father, and it is a very deep connection, otherwise the father would not have kept that woman's brain alive and sent it to the Psychological Institute in London as a nurse for decades. Of research objects. Although Sudbai was very reluctant to admit it, his parents' often strange behaviors when he was a child, as well as the wealth that was deliberately arranged for him at home, coupled with the affairs of the Edward Research Institute and his parents' bizarre accidents. My cheap parents must have had some secret back then. In addition, Lizzie's attitude toward him when he didn't leave was because his mother had funded an orphanage, of which he was one. Sudbai had never believed this explanation. "Haha, why don't you be so cliché," Sudbai murmured to himself. At this time, seeing the work that was probably his father's work appeared in this scroll, Sudbai felt a little more sad and lost a lot of thoughts. The urge to continue exploring. Even, some of them were dissatisfied. In fact, the investigation of the Edward Research Institute arranged by Sudbai before entering the last story world has already produced results. The abilities of the senior investigation teams and private detectives, both overt and covert, are also beyond doubt. After all, you get what you pay for. Sudbai received the notice after returning to the real world, but the report document was always locked in the safe at home, and Sudbai himself never opened it. The reason is very simple, even ridiculous. Different from the clichés of various sad TV dramas, Sudbai, as an orphan, his desire to explore the things about his parents is not actually strong. More, is an instinct, or a sense of moral restraint. Since he was very young, Subai has been accustomed to sitting alone in front of a large table and quietly eating a table of exquisite dishes prepared by the servants. This living habit. It lasted 10 years. My mother pays great attention to etiquette and all kinds of etiquette. She is like an elegant woman living in the Republic of China, as if she is Lin Huiyan living in contemporary times. Therefore, Subai was instilled with this kind of etiquette at a very young age and developed this kind of habit. It was not as cumbersome as Western etiquette, but it was still meticulous. Every time I eat, there will be 2 dishes and cutlery belonging to my parents on the table. Therefore, for Subai, every meal in those 10 years was a kind of torture for him, especially when his parents left. He was still a child under 7 years old, but at that time he was stubborn in this way. He foolishly maintained the appearance that his parents were still living with him. For 10 years, he had to experience the torture of this kind of thought every day. The longing for his parents and the various influences on family ethics filled the world and every corner of society, stimulating Subai all the time. It wasn't until Subai decided to leave the old house and go to school by himself that he finally got rid of the prison he had set for himself. However, after that, Subai suddenly discovered one thing, that was his own personality. It was distorted by the fact that I had spent 10 years on it. The long-term repressive environment, the long-term meticulousness, and the long-term suffocating atmosphere inspired a strong rebellious psychology in Subai's heart. A sort of the impulse that overturns everything. This has been quietly infiltrated into my bones through these 10 years. Therefore, in addition to giving them the wealth to live and feed themselves, their parents actually failed to fulfill their responsibilities as parents. At least in China now, there are really not many parents who are not capable enough to let their children starve to death. Even the wealth left to him by his parents. He. One thought comes to this. An intriguing smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. Before leaving Qinhuangdao, Qin Yang had said something like that to Subai. He was worried that if he made money with the ability he obtained from the terrorist broadcast, it would eventually be retributive on his family. So, does the reason why Subai himself participated in this horror broadcast mean? Sir, the plane is about to land, please fasten your seat belt, as stewardess came to Subai and said, interrupting Subai's thoughts. Well, thank you. After getting off the plane, Subai was walking towards the airport parking lot with his backpack on his back when his phone suddenly rang. The call alert showed that it was Sunur. A stone fell in Subai's heart. She came out alive. Yes, as an experiencer, the chance of survival was high, as long as she behaved and didn't be so stupid. After pressing the answer button, the other end of the phone remained silent, and Subai also remained silent. About a minute later, a voice came from the other side. Subai, have you experienced that too? Sunur's voice didn't contain much emotion, and he couldn't tell whether he was afraid or anxious. Yes, Subai responded, and at the same time started to wave for a taxi. You're not interesting enough, Sunur said suddenly. You didn't tell me about such a fun place before and secretly played alone. If you tell others this kind of thing, they won't believe it. Besides, you can't just tell it if you want to. You will understand this in the future. Sunur's reaction and emotion were within Subai's expectation. The 4 people formed the murder club. Subai did it because he was mentally ill and had a homicidal habit, Chu Zhao did it because of his rebellious mentality towards his family, and Gu Fan did it because of his mental illness and homicidal tendencies. Chasing Sunur, and Sunur. Purely for excitement. She seems to be a woman with an oriental soft beauty, but she is actually a military attaché stationed abroad, and she is also a runner who has always pursued the ultimate pursuit of sensory stimulation. Maybe, like myself, the story world of horror broadcasts is a great torture to others, but for myself and Sunur, in the real world, there is basically no meaning and necessity for struggle. She has no worries about money, and as a woman, Sunur doesn't have much ambition for power and high status. Therefore, perhaps in horror broadcasts, we can find another meaning of life. Subai knew that Sunar was interested in him, but he always treated Sunar like a friend. It was not because of Gufan. In fact, Subai also he's not the kind of pedantic man who would push the woman he likes to his buddies just for the sake of buddy friendship, but he really doesn't have much of a desire to be a lover towards Sunar. "Where are you now?" Sunar asked. "Just got off the plane and ready to go home." "I'll pick you up." "No, I'll take a taxi back." "You're really weird, you really don't look that rich." "It's money." "Now, it doesn't make much sense." "Okay, I'm getting in the car. You can go directly to my house later. Now I've become a grasshopper on a boat again, and I also need to communicate." "No, I have something to do today, let's do it tomorrow." Sunar thought for a while and rejected Subai's invitation. He just called Chu Zhao, but no one answered. He called Chu Zhao's parents and said Chu Zhao was traveling relaxed. Subai didn't know that Chu Zhao also listened to the terrorist broadcast immediately after the phone call with him. "It's up to you." Subai hung up the phone and put one hand on the taxi window. About 20 minutes later, the taxi arrived at Subai's home and got out of the car. Subai swiped the access control with the key card, opened the door, and walked in. The little guy was looking after someone happily playing on the carpet. Ultraman was playing on the TV, and the floor was full of toys. Seeing that Subai was back, the little guy was startled, then grinned and crawled directly towards Subai. Subai also threw his backpack towards Jixiang, then took the initiative to walk over, lifted the little guy up and spun him around a few times. "Perhaps, the only nostalgia I have now is the chubby little man in my hand. Daddy, daddy. Haha, son." Listening to the little guy calling himself daddy in a non-standard way, Subai suddenly thought of something in his mind, that is, if he continues to enjoy the property left by his parents, will he also bring the cause and effect to the little guy? Jixiang held Subai's backpack in its mouth and walked to the corner of the living room, but it looked here from time to time. It was indeed not at ease with Subai, the father of the child. "Come on, it's time to give you a name." Subai carried the little guy on a whim and walked to a cupboard in the living room. There were some decorative books there. Subai took down a Xinhua dictionary and put it in the cupboard. In front of the guy, "Turn it over yourself." The little guy bit his finger, then nodded and turned his chubby hands. When Subai saw that the first character on the page was Zhao, he immediately shook his head. The little guy must have his last name Su. The little guy was addicted to flipping through it. He flipped it over again and found the word iron, followed by the word Zhu. Zhao Taizu? Or Su Taizu? Subai gave up the idea of letting the little guy continue to look through the dictionary to name himself. If Suwaiguo, Sujianshi, or Subai came out again, it would be a toothache. "Forget it, son, your dad will take you to the temple tomorrow to ask for a good name." Subai kissed the little guy's pink face. He hadn't shaved for a long time, and the stubble made the little guy tickle and giggle. But Subai's heart suddenly became a little heavy. Tomorrow. How many tomorrows do I have? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 201. Since the last incident, Sunar has not seen Chu Zhao in reality again. She also knows how hard Chu Zhao has been. Her girlfriend died unexpectedly. No, to be precise, it was on her own behalf. My brother committed suicide when he ran towards me in the car. This kind of blow would be difficult for a normal man to bear, even if he is a policeman. On one side was his sweet girlfriend, and on the other was his childhood buddy. Caught between the two, Chu Zhao could only live like a coward by locking himself at home and drinking. This, maybe there is no other way. Chu Zhao's personality and Subai's are two extremes. The two of them usually look like ordinary people, but deep down in Subai's heart is a kind of impulse and violence that overturns everything. Chu Zhao, on the other hand, it seems a lot more cowardly, and it is really cowardly. Sudbai's parents died in an accident when he was very young, so Sudbai has been alone for so many years, while Chu Zhao is just the opposite. He has a very strong father and a very strong family. When he was disobedient or made mistakes when he was a child, his father would often hang him under the door frame and beat him with a police whip. When he grew up, his family forced him to become a policeman. He was disgusted, but he had to wear a police uniform. But at the same time, he also organized a murder club with several of his best friends as a way to vent his dissatisfaction with family arrangements. Suner drove the car into Chu Zhao's community. Even after his girlfriend had an accident, Chu Zhao did not move. On the one hand, he did not have many properties like Sudbai. As a police officer and a police family, even if the living conditions and economy were the conditions are relatively good but they can't show it. This is very similar to many civil servants nowadays. They can obviously afford a luxury car but can't. They can afford a luxury house but can't put it in their own name, nor can they blatantly buy it. The performance is a bit like walking at night in brocade clothes. Suner knocked on the door of Chu Zhao's house. She thought that Chu Zhao would be asleep after being drunk at this time, but to her surprise, Chu Zhao still opened the door. Chu Zhao, who was wearing a white shirt, looked so tough and refreshing, and his beard was cleanly shaved, giving people a very refreshing feeling. This made Suner a little surprised. In her impression, Chu Zhao shouldn't have walked out on his own so quickly, and walked out so thoroughly. Is something wrong? There was no need to be so polite with Suner. Chu Zhao went directly to the bathroom to wash his face with men's facial cleanser. Are you okay? Suner walked into the living room, took out a can of beer from the refrigerator, opened it, and took a sip. No, it's gotten worse, Chu Zhao replied while rubbing his face. Why? Suner asked. I'm going to find Sudbai. I have something to ask him. Chu Zhao had just washed his face with water and was now wiping it with a towel and walking out. Like me, I originally planned to come to see you and then go find Sudbai. What a coincidence. Chu Zhao took a deep breath and then spit it out heavily. Aren't you going back to England? I applied for leave, Suner said with a smile. Why? Chu Zhao was a little confused. This would affect Suner's future. Something happened, and I don't want to be distracted now. Suner shook the beer can. What about you? What's going on? After listening to a radio broadcast, I suddenly felt that life became meaningful again. Then, I suddenly felt that drinking all day long and falling unconscious is now a very luxurious thing. Chu Zhao reached for the beer in Suner's hand. But Suner directly avoided it. You can't drink when you drive later. Suner blinked. By the way, radio. Haha, it can't be such a coincidence. It's called terror radio, right? Chu Zhao was suddenly stunned. Suner was stunned immediately. Both of them seemed a little surprised. Unexpectedly. What a coincidence. If the mountain is not high, it will be famous if there are immortals. If the water is not deep, it will be spiritual if there is a dragon. However, it is not an easy thing to find a temple that satisfies oneself and a genuine eminent monk in such a huge magical city. In a materialistic society, how many people here can practice meditation and persevere? What about people with true intentions? Sudbai was very careful about naming the little guy, and didn't want to just give it up casually. Since he became a father, he had to look like a father. There was no other way. After looking at several companies and feeling dissatisfied, Sudbai still called the monk. Although Sudbai had just cut off monk whose belongings, Sudbai didn't feel any psychological burden or guilt at all. Hey, monk, do you know any senior brothers or sisters in Shanghai? Introduce one to me. I'm going to have a look at the child and give him a name by the way. The monk was silent for a while, thinking to himself, couldn't he just call himself in Josegu when he wanted to choose a name? But, this poor monk knows someone. Okay, send me your address. Sudbai hung up the phone. Soon, the monk sent an address from WeChat. Subai entered the information into the car navigation system. It was not very far, but it looked like he lived in an apartment building, not a temple. About a quarter of an hour later, Subai's car drove into the community. The community had to rely on sensors to open the door automatically. But after seeing Subai's luxury car, the security guard immediately opened the door for Subai. Subai was also very polite. When he passed the guard booth, he handed over a tip of 100 yuan. Today is a happy day to name the little guy, and Subai also wants to accumulate more luck for the little guy. After going around and around, he finally found the building. Subai parked the car next to the flower bed, and then walked in with the little guy in his arms. Jixiang rarely followed him this time, but stayed at home. The cat yesterday I still couldn't help myself from watching the painting all night long. But before Subai took the little guy away from home, Jixiang followed him all the way to the car. He even jumped on Subai's steering wheel and stared at Subai for a while, meaning that he was watching Subai for a while. He earnestly told Subai to take good care of the little guy. Jixiang was a good intention, and Subai couldn't let it happen. He really raised the little guy as his own child. Now, for Subai, even if he sacrificed his own life, he would not let the little guy suffer any harm. Entered the elevator, reached the 13th floor, and turned left. The monk didn't give me a phone number, but he gave me a detailed house number. Subai stood in front of the door and knocked on the door. After knocking 7 times, the door opened by itself. The furnishings inside were very simple and not very clean. There was even a thin layer of dust, as if no one had lived there for a long time. In the living room, there was a monk wearing cassock sitting cross-legged with his back to Subai. "Master," Subai shouted. There was no response from the other party. Subai frowned. The monk shouldn't be so shameless that he would trick him on this kind of thing. Moreover, he came here for the sake of the little guy. The monk himself can be regarded as half of the little guy's godfather. However, Subai felt that the monk in front of him looked like a dead person. Just when Subai was deciding whether to leave the room first and then call the monk to confirm whether the eminent monk you introduced to me had passed away long ago. However, when Subai was about to retreat, a sigh came from the monk. Immediately afterwards, the surroundings suddenly became brighter and cleaner, the dust disappeared in an instant, and the monk's body seemed to be slowly being inflated. The bulge became like a normal person. The little guy covered his mouth with his hands and opened his eyes wide. He was obviously very curious about the changes around him. "This kid is pretty good." The monk stood up, turned around, and faced Subai. "The cassock is not very new, but it exudes a kind of majesty. The monk looks very old, but very healthy, giving people an extremely unreal feeling. Born and raised by nature, that's interesting. Why would he follow you?" The monk walked towards Subai. Subai's eyes narrowed slightly, and murderous intent began to emerge. The monk stopped knowingly, looked at the child, then at Subai, and smiled slightly. "Why did you come to see this poor monk? Look for the master and ask for a name." "Amitabha." The monk clasped his hands together and recited the Buddha's name, then slowly closed his eyes, and then opened them again. For a moment, the monk's eyes became extremely deep, as if they had become two abyss, which could make people fall involuntarily. "Go in." After a while, the monk let out a long sigh of relief, and his whole body became much more sluggish, as if he had consumed a lot of energy. "Are you sure you want him to follow you?" the monk asked. "It would be better for this child if you don't stay with him." "It doesn't matter, he must follow me," Subai said. Subai had already thought about this clearly. "Well, the world is safe and sound. What's your last name?" "Su." "Let the child be called Su Yuxuan." Yuxuan refers to the pavilion in the rain, the Xianyuan in the rain, and the pavilion and corridor used to take shelter when it rains. The donor also hopes that this child can become the last refuge in your heart. The monk had something to say, and then turned around and sat cross-legged. His figure began to become haggard again, and the surrounding brightness and window brightness were slowly dimming. Subai nodded. Seeing that the monk had already made a move to see off the guests, Subai left the room and the door slowly closed automatically. What I know is that the eminent monk hides himself in the city, but those who don't know think it's a haunted house. Subai smiled, then reached out and poked the little guy's chin gently. Son, you will be called Yuxuan from now on. How about Su Yuxuan? The little guy sucked his fingers as if he was thinking or hesitating. In the end, he nodded with a bit of a grimace. Then, he opened his hands with a smile and started to kick his calves lightly. Daddy, Daddy, hug. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 202. After leaving the community, Subai drove to a large shopping mall. After parking the car in the parking lot under the shopping mall, Subai took the elevator up with the little guy in his arms. On the first floor, there were neatly arranged shopping carts outside the elevator. Now the shopping cart seemed very humane. Subai remembered that when he accompanied his parents to the supermarket when he was a child, there was a shopping cart specially for children. It was a small seat. At that time, my mother liked to let her sit there and push her to go shopping. At that time, Subai always felt that it was embarrassing for a little boy to sit in that position. Yes, it was embarrassing, and he resisted it many times, but his mother was so happy to do it at that time. Now there is a cartoon toy-style cabin under the shopping cart, which is connected with the shopping cart. Subai found an Ultraman one, then put the little guy in, and then pushed the cart towards the merchandise area. After all, the little guy was young and didn't think as much as Subai did at first. Instead, he found it interesting to sit inside and watch Subai push him away. He kept patting his little fleshy hands and shouting, like encouraging Subai. Quiet, boy, you're not Godzilla, I won't have any trouble pushing you. Subai smiled at the little guy, then took out a box of chocolate bars, tore open the box and handed it to the little guy sitting in Ultraman's cabin below. Oh no, now he must be called Su Yuxuan. When the little guy had food, he was like most children of this age. He took it and started eating. Subai found some more food, opened the sealed bags and handed them to the little guy below. Afterwards, Subai was going to change to a commodity area to buy some other things. At this time, a uniformed supermarket employee ran over and stopped Subai. Sir, I'm sorry. According to the regulations of the supermarket, unchecked items are not allowed to be opened and eaten in the supermarket. Please take these items to the checkout first and pay the fine. I haven't bought the things yet. It's not like I won't pay for these things, Subai said. I'm sorry, sir, this is our rule here. The saleswoman looked calm on the surface, but there was a kind of contempt in her heart. In what age, there are still people eating in the supermarket without paying? It's not more than 10 years old. It was years ago, when large supermarkets had just entered all tier cities. Indeed, many customers made a lot of jokes because of their greed for petty advantages. But now that there are cameras everywhere in supermarkets, there are still people who are so unqualified. Subai looked at the little guy. The little guy seemed to know that something was wrong and stopped putting food in his mouth. Instead, he pouted his mouth and looked at the unfinished food in his hand. Okay, let me take a look first. I remember. Subai took out his phone and looked at it. The saleswoman remained polite enough to stand next to Subai. At the same time, security guards were already coming over there. It was not for a fight or anything like that, but just to create a scene. Oh, sure enough, I'm sorry, This supermarket is in my name. Sudbai flipped through his phone book as he spoke, and then made a call. After handing it to the saleswoman, I didn't even want my phone. I turned around and pushed the shopping cart away, continuing shopping. About 5 minutes later, the saleswoman and two formally dressed people who seemed to be in charge ran over. It was obvious that it took a lot of effort to find Sudbai among the dazzling shelves. These people, cold sweat also broke out on his forehead. The saleswoman handed the phone to Sudbai with some fear. Sudbai took the phone and smiled, "It's okay. I'll buy something myself. Just don't bother me." These people wanted to open their mouths to say something, but seeing Sudbai's attitude, they obviously didn't want others to disturb their and their children's shopping time, so they didn't dare to continue to disturb them and immediately backed away. Sudbai patted the little guy's head, "Keep eating, don't be afraid, this supermarket belongs to us, you can eat whatever you want." The little guy grinned happily and continued to eat. Half an hour later, Sudbai left the shopping mall. In fact, he didn't buy a lot of things. In fact, someone at home would regularly replace food, water, and other daily necessities in the refrigerator and other places. The things Sudbai needed to buy by himself were really extreme. Of course, it can also be said that I wanted to take the little one to the supermarket on a whim. In the parking lot under the shopping mall, Sudbai walked to his car and found a well-dressed woman in her mid-20s standing next to her car. It looked like she had been waiting for a long time. However, but he didn't know her. "Hello." The woman took off her sunglasses, with a very delicate face. From her hairstyle to her clothes, she dressed herself impeccably. This is a woman who has extremely high requirements for appearance and temperament, and she has clothes are not priced within the reach of ordinary people. Is something wrong? It's just that Sudbai is a little confused about the style. Now that he is a father, he can't hook up with other women in front of his children. The little guy looked at the elder sister and then at Sudbai, and his cute little eyes narrowed. "Sorry, I bumped into your car when I was reversing. I stayed here to resolve the matter." The woman bowed to Sudbai. Sudbai heard this and walked to his car to take a look. Sure enough, there was a scratch on the door on the cab side. It was not very serious. Of course, compared to the value of Sudbai's car, it was different. "It doesn't matter, it's okay," Sudbai said as he opened his trunk, put the shopping in, then hugged the little guy and prepared to get in the car and leave. The woman was a little surprised and said, "Don't you think those procedures have been completed?" "Yes, miss, thank you for staying and waiting for me." "Okay, everything is fine now." "Can I go?" Sudbai pulled up the car window. He remembered that there were several cars parked in his garage. "I changed it to another one when I came out for the first time. Besides, it doesn't mean much to Sudbai if there is no car now." Unexpectedly, the woman actually opened the passenger seat and got in. "Then can you please take me home on the way? I've already called someone to drive my car away and send it for repair. I don't like to drive out with a defective car." "My car was also scratched," Sudbai reminded. "It's different. It's you who is driving, not me." Then, the woman looked at the little guy sitting in the back and said, "Is this your son? He's so cute." As she said that, the woman opened her hands and took the little guy into her arms. The little guy didn't recognize the child at all and instead started playing with the woman. Sudbai sighed and asked, "Where do you live?" "Prince Building," the woman replied. Sudbai backed up the car and drove out of the garage. When he got on the road, the woman suddenly said, "Is your life very stressful? And your temper is not very good?" Sudbai didn't answer, just drove quietly. The prince's building was not far from here. "And you should have grown up in a single-parent family, or even, lived alone since you were a child," the woman asked tentatively. "Have you investigated me?" Sudbai asked. "No, I can tell a lot by looking at your car, but there's one thing I can't figure out. When I just saw you coming over with your child, you looked completely different. Which one is the real you? What do you do? Physiotherapist, my studio is in the Prince building. This is my business card. The woman put the business card on Sudbai's lap. Actually, you have a serious psychological disorder and a lot of physical and mental pressure. My job is to help people relieve and release their stress. Do you want me to help you? Sudbai smiled and said, you can't solve my pressure. Yes, can you resolve the pressure caused by the terrorist broadcast and the pressure created by your own living environment since childhood? Don't believe me? In fact, my work is relatively advanced, and even in Europe and the United States, it is not accepted by the mainstream. But sometimes it can produce miraculous results. As he spoke, Sudbai had already arrived at the corner of the Prince's building. A traffic accident happened because a truck rolled over in front of him. The road was blocked, and many cars gathered in front and behind. Look, there's a traffic jam anyway, so go to my office and have a cup of tea. I'm quite embarrassed that you didn't even go through the process if your car was scratched. Sudbai didn't say anything, but still turned the steering wheel left and drove into the open-air parking space in front of the Prince's building. After getting out of the car, the woman enthusiastically led the way. The little guy was in high spirits and kept moving in Sudbai's arms. Sudbai lightly tapped the little guy on the head. Why are you so excited? People think your father is rich and that's why he is so diligent in attracting customers. Isn't my money your money from now on? After listening to Sudbai's words, the little guy fell silently. He seemed to be really thinking. Sudbai didn't know whether this little guy could understand what he just said. The name on the woman's business card is Ying, which is in English. There is also a special perfume on the business card. Ying's office is on the 27th floor. When you walk in, you will see a very ordinary office. It is not very luxurious, but it is also very good. However, the office should be much larger than ordinary because there is a red curtain covering half of the space. Ying started to change her clothes. She walked to the clothes rack like no one else, stripped herself down to her black underwear and put on a set of white clothes similar to pajamas. Want to try it out? Not interested, Sudbai replied. Haha, you misunderstood. Ying walked to the red curtain, reached out and opened it. Immediately, another world appeared in the office. Through physical pain of a specific degree and a specific period of time, it can relieve and release people's inner stress and pain. Don't worry, I am an expert in this field. I am very confident in my professional quality and professional ability. Okay, now, let me ask you again. Sir, would you like to try my service? Sudbai put the little guy on the sofa, wrapped 2 Hellfire shotguns in a windbreaker and placed them next to the little guy. Then he walked in. Ying knew how to pull the curtain back to block the little guy's sight. Then she signaled Sudbai to raise his arms, and then she cuffed Sudbai's hands with bracelets. Pay attention, I want to increase the height of the bracelet to give your body more tension. As soon as he finished speaking, the bracelet was too high and Sudbai's arms were hung up high. Of course, this bracelet and the torture tools here couldn't actually trap Sudbai. However, he really wanted to try to see if this curious method would be effective. If this woman relies on the things here, if it really threatens him, then Sudbai can really kill him with a piece of tofu. Ying held a leather whip in her left hand and an electric shock baton in her right hand. Then, as if she had thought of something, she took off the pajamas she had just changed into. By the way, what flavor do you like? I can change your clothes into something more professional. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 203. Whatever. Sudbai slowly closed his eyes. I'm not very interested in this. Why, don't you men all like this taste? Ying's leather whip gently slid over Sudbai's face, and her hand was also close to Sudbai's chest, stroking it rhythmically. Don't think that I am that kind of woman who is flirtatious. This is just part of the treatment. I am full of respect for my work, my customers, and myself. Don't get me wrong, I just said that it can be faster, Subai explained. But, sir, you have to cooperate with me, step by step, you know? In this way, the effect of the treatment can be maximized. Modified and omitted. Zitsize. The electric shock rod stabbed directly into the soft flesh of Sudbai's waist. Hiss. Sudbai took a breath. Completely caught off guard. The body began to spasm and twitch, but Sudbai still gritted his teeth. He was suppressing his body's counter-attack instinct, forcing his blood that had been agitated by the electric shock to calm down again, and relaxing his body to make the effect of the electric shock more effective. Come in. Ying frowned slightly. She was a professional, so she could feel the intensity of her electric shock, but it was just an itch for the man in front of her. It seems that the young man in front of me. It's even more powerful than I imagined. Ying's eyes narrowed slightly, and she clicked harder. Electricity began to flow through Sudbai's body, and Sudbai's body began to tremble and tremble faster and faster. He did not groan, but his body was shaking non-stop at this time. Ying kept adjusting the intensity of the current and the position of the electric shock rod. Finally, she found a critical point. She continued to shock while seriously observing Sudbai's reaction. Gradually, the physical stimulation began to penetrate into Sudbai's spiritual consciousness, and his whole body actually felt like an ecstasy. This is a feeling that is difficult to describe in words, a feeling that makes people feel incredible. A feeling of, can it really have this effect? Ying's words carried a kind of charm, constantly echoing in Sudbai's ears. The distance was suddenly far and now close, and the breath sometimes hit her face, and sometimes it was completely unpredictable. What did you feel? Did you feel like you were flying? Your soul is very light, with a feeling of flying freely, and it is flying higher and higher, flying higher and higher. It has already flown over the clouds. Beside you, there is a blue sky, and above you, quick, yes, slowly look up, there is light above your head, a very strong light, light. At this time, Sudbai took the initiative to relax his body, take the initiative to let go of his mental consciousness, and let Ying do something to him. Otherwise, with Ying's ability, she would not be able to do this to Sudbai. And Sudbai's consciousness also actively cooperated with Ying. He felt that his soul had floated into the sky, that his body had been completely freed from restraints, and that he had gained a great freedom. Gradually, Ying moved the electric shock rod away, and a steel rope appeared in her hand, and she silently put it around Sudbai's neck. At this time, Sudbai was still in the aftermath of the electric shock. Ying gently tightened the steel rope, giving Sudbai a certain degree of suffocation. Beads of sweat appeared on the tip of her nose. Obviously, she was also very tired, because she had to control the angle and intensity of the electric shock before, and she had to hypnotize Sudbai. Now, this kind of strangulation work is too difficult for a woman to do. Which is also a very strenuous movement. You are gradually unable to breathe, but your body and mind have gained a great freedom, so free that it makes you feel comfortable and makes you forget everything. Your body has been wrapped in a ball of light. That is the warmth of the sun, that is the embrace of the sun, it is accepting you, it is waiting for you, it is calling you. Let go of all your guardings, let go of all your guardings, and welcome the warmest warmth from the depths of your heart. Listen to me, take your time. Slowly. Come. Sudbai seemed to really see that his side was completely covered by white light. In the end, a grassland appeared around him. The sun was shining brightly. The altitude of Ruurgai was very high and the air was a little thin, but the sky was extremely blue, the sunshine was full, and the grass was green. Cattle and sheep are in pieces. This is a beautiful scenery, so beautiful that it takes your breath away. Subai looked at himself and found that he was wearing a small suit, and he seemed to have become very small. Take off your clothes when it's hot. My silly son is just like you when I first met your dad. No matter how hot or cold you are, you have to maintain your demeanor. Don't you know this is stupid? Don't be warm but have a demeanor, it will make people laugh to death. A very kind and sweet female voice sounded in Subai's ears. This time, it was not Ying Ying's voice, but came from another woman, with a touch of joy and joy. This voice also made Subai feel very friendly, and even, very nostalgic, as if it had always existed deep in his heart and in his soul. A pair of warm hands helped him take off his suit, revealing the children's shirt underneath. The woman pulled him from behind, and the two of them sat down on the hillside together. The woman's arms were wrapped around her, and their heads were touching. Son, that's a yak. The woman wore a sky blue long dress, which did not cover up her slim figure. Instead, it highlighted a beauty that echoed youth and maturity, and naturally revealed an elegant temperament belonging to an aristocrat. When Subai read some interesting stories about the Republic of China in the future, every time he read about Lin Huiyan, he could always connect Lin Huiyan with the woman deep in his memory. Her talent, her temperament, her gentleness, and cuteness. She is no different from Lin Huiyan. Moreover, she does not like to hang around as much as Lin Huiyan. In her heart, there is only her husband. Okay, you two, just sit in front for a while. A loud man shouted from behind. Subai subconsciously wanted to turn his head and look back, but the woman held Subai back. Don't move. Dad is painting for us. Look, how beautiful it is here. Subai wanted to raise his head again and look at the woman's face. He enjoyed this warm feeling, really, enjoyed it. However, when Subai just raised his head and hadn't seen the woman's face, a splash of ice water suddenly hit his face. Cough cough, cough cough, cough cough. Subai was crouching on the ground at this time, coughing constantly. On the soft flesh of his ribs, a bruise was slowly fading away, and there was still a trace of bruise on his neck. Own. Own. He was still a little bit away from seeing his mother's face. Damn it, why did he stop? Why stopped, why? Subai grabbed Ying Ying's shoulder with one hand. At this time, the woman was also kneeling on the ground. She was dripping with sweat, her lips were a little white, and she looked very weak. Obviously, it was very important for her to provide treatment to Subai. It is also a huge burden. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. Ying Ying shouted. Only then did Subai react, let go of his hand, raised his head, and took a deep breath. Ying Ying looked at Subai and bit her lip. Your psychological pressure and accumulated emotions are countless times greater than I thought before. How on earth can you still take your child to the supermarket? By the way, did you just almost accomplish what you have always wanted to do? Let me tell you, this is impossible. Just like a normal dream, you always wake up at the most critical moment. In fact, you don't wake up at exactly that second, because human consciousness and real time are not in the same time. In the time dimension, you think in your dream and subconscious that there is only a slight difference in time. In fact, the difference may be half an hour or as much as a few hours. If I don't stop just now, you will be strangled to death by me. Do you know that it is just like the famous case of the boy in red? Playing this at home ended up strangling yourself. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 204. The case of the boy in red. Subai finally recovered at this time. He stood up staggeringly, twisted his neck, stretched his body, and made a series of brittle sounds on his body. Then he walked out of the curtain and touched the little guy's head. The little guy was already lying on the sofa and fell asleep, but his whole little body was lying on Subai's clothes. This was to protect the two pieces under Subai's clothes. A gun. This kid. Subai smiled, picked up the little guy and gently placed him on the other side of the sofa. He immediately put on his clothes and put the Hellfire shotgun into his windbreaker. Some of the scars on her body have now recovered. This is why Subai was in such a hurry to put on clothes. With Ying Ying's expertise, she would definitely notice that the click scars on her body and the strangle marks and bruises on her neck had disappeared. Details. I'm so tired. Ying Ying stood up holding onto the wall, stumbled and sat behind her desk, opened a bottle of mineral water, put some medicine in it, and drank it. After breathing for a while, Ying Ying seemed to have recovered. Of all my customers, you are the most difficult to deal with, both physically and mentally. I can feel that you are constantly subconsciously relaxing your body and spirit to allow me to enter. So. I'm very surprised, sir. What did you do before? Mercenary. Special forces. Sorry, please forgive the limitations of my thinking, but in my experience, these are the only people who can have a strong will while having an enviable body. Most people can easily occupy a little bit of it. It's very good. There are really very few people who occupy both. For many people, when their willpower is tempered, their bodies have already entered a decline, and those whose bodies are still in a strong stage have not yet fully matured their minds. You're thinking too much, Subai replied. Okay, it's time for me to leave. I don't know your name yet. Ying Ying was lying on the office chair like a lazy kitten, with her charming feet raised on the desk, with a special and strange aura. Subai. Then, Mr. Su, the slave family will be waiting here for your next visit. Subai picked up the little guy and walked out of the office. After getting off the elevator, the natural wind outside blew over, and Subai suddenly felt a sense of relief that he had not seen for a long time. Subai suddenly felt a little funny. Could this kind of method similar to SM really be able to relieve the pressure in his heart? The little guy yawned at this time, and his chubby little body began to stretch out. Then he rubbed his eyes with his two little hands, looked at Subai, actually snickered, and then buried his face in Subai's chest. You little brat, you're so ridiculous. Subai patted the little guy's butt and got in the car. The traffic accident had been dealt with and the road was open again. Subai drove over. When waiting for the traffic light at the next traffic light, Subai saw the little guy sitting in the passenger seat twisting his body and looking at him. Subai reached out and rubbed the little guy's nose. What are you looking at? The little guy pouted, then sat upright again. When he returned home, it was already evening. There was a car that looked familiar to Subai parked in front of his house. Looking at the license plate number, Subai knew who was coming. At this time, on the steps in front of the gate, Sunur and Chu Zhao were sitting there. Seeing Subai coming back, the two of them finally stood up. Obviously, they must have been waiting for a long time. Why don't you call me? Subai asked with some confusion. I've called many times, but no one answered. Sunur said, Master Su is a very busy man, so of course he doesn't have time to deal with little characters like us. It turns out that everything in fairy tales is a lie. Don't forget to be rich and noble. It's really just talk. Sunur came over and helped Subai carry the little guy over. Subai opened the trunk and took out the things he bought. When he entered the door, he saw Chu Zhao next to him and just nodded silently. Chu Zhao only gave a look with his eyes. As soon as the little guy entered the house, Ji Xiang ran down. He didn't care about the presence of Chu Zhao and Sunur, and ran upstairs with the little guy's clothes in his mouth. He was probably going to give the little guy a bath. As for the little guy's personal hygiene, Jixiang cares about it very much. Subai, where is your tea? Sunur asked. You should look for it yourself. I don't know. There is juice in the refrigerator. I still want to drink tea. Sunur walked into the kitchen. Oh, here it is. When Sunur brought out 3 cups of tea, the 3 people present had finally sat down. Chu Zhao, he came in too, Sunur said at this time. Subai nodded. When he saw Chu Zhao and Jixiang's attitude towards Chu Zhao just now, Subai also understood this. It's interesting. We all heard that broadcast. Subai took a sip of tea and exhaled, here, let's cheers to you for surviving the experience mission. Suner immediately raised his teacup, but Chu Zhao didn't move. Subai and Suner bumped into each other, and the scene seemed a bit awkward. Chu Zhao touched his chin with both hands and looked at Subai. Subai, is Hui's matter related to the broadcast? Subai nodded, it's related. Suner looked at Chu Zhao and frowned with dissatisfaction. Chu Zhao, didn't I tell you before? That woman had bad intentions when she first came into contact with you. You misunderstood Subai. Chu Zhao did not speak, but crossed his hands, showing the entanglement in his heart at this time. I could have ignored this matter. I saw the photo you sent me last time I was in Josegu. I saw something was wrong, so I came back specially. Then, the real mission was announced on the radio. Chu Zhao's smoke ring was slightly red, but he still raised the teacup, drank it in one breath, and then put the teacup on the coffee table. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Now go and tell your dad what you encountered in the experience mission before and see if your dad believes it. Moreover, ordinary people cannot sense or understand anything about broadcasting. Remember me in the first half of the year? The roommate who had a heart attack. In fact, he didn't have a heart disease. I shot him with your gun. Didn't you find that there was not a single bullet missing in your gun? The autopsy report also revealed that he died of a heart attack. Chu Zhao covered his face with his hands and sank into the sofa. Would you like to have dinner together tonight? Suner asked. What about the name? Subai asked, to celebrate that the three of us heard the broadcast. Otherwise. Do you cook? Suner asked, I remember that you cook very well. Subai waved his hand, forget it, I'm too lazy to cook, let's go out to eat. Suner stood up and pulled Chu Zhao. Chu Zhao sat up. Although his mood was not very high, he finally returned to normal. However, Subai didn't know what he was thinking in his heart. In fact, maybe Suner and Chu Zhao didn't feel it. When Subai learned that they had also listened to the terrorist broadcast, a layer of estrangement between him and them had already appeared. Subai still remembers clearly how he, the fat man, and the monk fell in love and killed each other. Now that they have become the audience, there is no guarantee that he will be stabbed sometimes, because in the story world, people, everything will change. Subai took the little guy down who was smelling good after taking a bath. Ji Xiang continued to stay upstairs and look at the painting. The cat now had a tendency to get closer to the artist. 3 adults and 1 child got into the car together. Subai restarted the car and asked, what are we going to eat? Western food, Suner suggested. Okay, Subai nodded. Chu Zhao was still a little distracted at the moment, so Subai was too lazy to continue to ask Chu Zhao for his opinion. About 20 minutes later, Subai drove the car to the entrance of a Western restaurant, which was considered a relatively high-end Western restaurant for Shanghai. Everyone got out of the car, and Subai threw the car key to a serviceman who came over. Student, and then walked directly in with the little guy in his arms. There is a place in the corner of the restaurant specifically for children of all ages to play, and there are 2 dedicated waiters responsible for taking care of the children. Seeing Subai coming with the child in his arms, a waiter immediately came over and bowed and asked, Sir, may I help you take care of your child? Subai looked at the little guy, and the little guy looked at a child who was about the same age as himself sitting there, and then turned his head in disgust. It seems that the little guy is too lazy to play with other little kids. No, thank you, please arrange a seat for us. Okay, please come this way. Everyone was seated and Suner was in charge of ordering food. Chu Zhao finally recovered at this time, went to get a bottle of red wine himself, opened the bottle, poured it for Subai and himself, and took the initiative to raise the glass. Make up, I'm sorry. This apology is too insincere. I still have to pay for this bottle of wine. Although Subai was teasing like this, he still raised his glass and touched it with Chuzhao, and the two of them drank it down. That's. Let's bury the hatchet. Okay, let me go to the bathroom first and help me take care of the child. Don't worry, you won't lose your little cutie. Suner took the initiative to sit over and pinched the little guy's chubby cheeks. Subai stood up and walked to the bathroom under the guidance of the waiter. When passing by the previous place, he found that the waiter and the baby who were looking after the baby were no longer here. His parents should have taken the child away after finishing their meal. However, when Subai opened the bathroom door and walked in, his body suddenly trembled slightly. The taste of blood. Fresh blood. Subai is very sensitive to blood. Subai looked around, and finally, he opened the door of a compartment. A baby. There is a weight hanging at your feet. Hanged in this compartment. The baby's head seemed to have been poked with an awl or a thick needle to make a deep bloody hole. At this time, the baby was no longer breathing. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 205. Chu Zhao also walked into the bathroom at this time. He saw Subai washing his hands in the sink and said with some confusion. What's wrong? Subai put his hands on the dryer expressionlessly and looked at the cubicle, meaning you should go and see it yourself. Chu Zhao immediately walked over and opened the compartment door, and then his face was shocked. Call the police. Chu Zhao took out his mobile phone and prepared to call the police. He was a policeman. No matter how much he rejected this profession before, when he encountered this kind of thing, his professional attributes still made him act instinctively. Subai didn't do anything, didn't move anything, quietly dried his hands, and then walked out of the bathroom. After a while, Chu Zhao also walked out after making a phone call. Did you find anything? Chu Zhao asked Subai. Subai shook his head and looked at Chu Zhao. It doesn't seem like it was done by the audience. It would be difficult for ordinary audience members to do such a thing. You are a police officer, so you should investigate first. Chu Zhao sighed. We're not going to eat anymore. You and Suner leave first. I'll wait here for my colleagues. Subai looked at Chu Zhao. Are you sure you can work normally now? I know myself, Chu Zhao said. Okay, let's go first. After something like this happened, Subai had no intention of continuing to eat here. Of course, it was impossible for the place to continue operating today. Suner hugged the little guy and left the store with Subai. In fact, as a policeman, Chu Zhao knew that no one in the store was allowed to leave, including customers and service staff. This is a rule, but Chu Zhao knows better that some rules do not apply to Subai and Suner. Not to mention their identities in reality are enough to break such rules, plus they are still listeners, it is even less likely to be bound by such rules. After getting in the car, Subai held the steering wheel with one hand, but was not in a hurry to start the car. Suner just looked at her phone and Chu Zhao sent her the picture in the bathroom stall. At this time, she also understood what happened. The little guy was sitting in Suner's arms, feeling depressed. Some of his intuitions were very keen. A child about his own age lost his breath so close to him. The little guy felt the same sadness. Aren't you leaving? Suner suddenly asked. Let's go. Subai was about to start the car. However, as soon as the car started to move, Subai stepped on the brakes and the car stopped on the road. Forget it, I won't go. Suner didn't say anything, just hugged the little guy silently. Subai reversed the car again, waiting for the results of Chu Zhao's investigation. Since it's not the listeners who did it, I want to see who is playing tricks here. Yes, a nearly 1-year-old child was stabbed in the head, tied with a weight to his feet, and hung to death. It was really a show-off, and it seemed like some sort of ritual. "Is the murderer still in the restaurant?" Suner asked. "It depends on the situation. He may be here or not. If he is a staff member of the restaurant, then he should still be in the restaurant, because his identity will be exposed if he leaves. If it is someone who sneaked in deliberately, then he should not be here now." Subai took out a bottle of mineral water from the car and drank several sips, then put the bottle back. At this time, a police car was already driving on the street in front of him. "Didn't I tell you to leave first?" Chu Zhao took off his gloves and walked to Subai and Suner. Subai and Suner had just been called over to record a transcript. However, because they had sufficient alibi and Chu Zhao's the policeman acted as a guarantee, so making a record was a simple process. Of course, the most important thing was that the police already had a very clear clue, that is, after the incident, there was a person in the restaurant who was responsible for taking care of the customers' children. "Waitress, gone. It doesn't look like she was murdered because there are videotapes around the restaurant showing that she sneaked out through the back door on her own, and they haven't contacted her yet. The police have already gone to her residence, and they should be there soon. There will be news that if she is not found at her home, she will probably be wanted throughout the city. After all, the camera in the restaurant also captured her carrying the child to the bathroom, but in order to protect privacy, so no cameras were installed. Is that woman crazy, torturing a child like this?" Suner said with some confusion. The little guy had fallen asleep at this time and was lying on her shoulder. "Maybe it's a mental illness," Chu Zhao said, but obviously he didn't believe it himself. After all, not every mental patient is Subai, and even if Subai killed someone, he wouldn't say that he would do it to such a young person. The child took action, and even killed the child in this way. Subai frowned and remained silent. Then, he seemed to have thought of something and looked at Chu Zhao. "Do you think that the way this child died is very similar to the way the deceased in the Chongqing boy case died? There were wounds on the top of his head caused by thick needles. A weight was tied to his feet and he was hanged to death." Chu Zhao smiled unnaturally. "It should just be a crude imitation." Subai shook his head. "Not necessarily." As he said that, Subai's cell phone rang. It was a reply from Fatty. Subai had asked Suner for the photo before and sent it to Fatty. At this time, Fatty finally sent it to Fatty. His reply was sent over. Although the relationship between Subai and Fatty was not very good, everyone would still subconsciously exchange opinions on matters that did not involve entangled interests. After all, there were specialties in the art industry, and no one could guarantee that they would encounter things you don't understand outside of your own strengthening system. According to Fatty's observation, this should be somewhat different from the mythical legend about the Chongqing boy case, because in the Chongqing boy case, the boy was first subdued, put on a soul-locking red suit, and tied with a soul-dropping weight. It is to retain the soul. Then kill the boy and insert the soul-separating needle into his head. This is to release the soul. It is estimated that the murderer should have a Taoist magic weapon to contain the soul, such as a gourd, a box and other things to contain the soul. Finally, it is hung on the beam, because according to Taoism, the soul cannot be completely purified, so it must be allowed to leave the ground, leaped from the soil. The reason why it is hung on the beam is because wood represents life and has the effect of attracting souls. Only in this way can the child's soul be purified. As for the 13 years and 13 days, the female relative's watery red clothes are nothing more than raising the soul to the level of yin. But what you have here is just superficial. It seems that many places are imitating it, but it doesn't make any sense. The toilet is a place with a strong yin energy, but the toilets in high-end restaurants are different from the public toilets on the street. The yin energy there is, in fact, there are very few of them. After all, there are not many people using them, and there are basically people who are responsible for cleaning before and after the day. In addition, the wound on the child's head looked more like it was made for the purpose of gouging, and was not cut on a certain acupuncture point at all. Many other details seem to be the same as the Chungching boy case, but they really just look similar. After reading these replies, Subai was not completely relieved. He always felt that something was wrong, but he could not tell what was wrong. However, the horror broadcast did not release any real-life missions, so he should be able to tell about this incident. For horror broadcasts, this is hardly an event for listeners to process. Chu Zhao's cell phone rang at this time. He was now considered a middle-aged man. In addition, this case was also the murder scene he discovered, so all the progress of the case would be summarized to him. Hey, what? Chu Zhao's breathing suddenly became rapid. I will send people over for reinforcements immediately. You guys protect the scene. After putting down the phone, Chu Zhao's face looked very ugly. What's wrong? Suner asked. Did something happen again? Chu Zhao nodded solemnly. The waitress was just found dead at home. Her death condition was exactly the same as that child. Chu Zhao turned around and looked at Subai. Subai, this is really not what the audience did. Subai shrugged, unless he is crazy, or this child is his father-killing enemy and he is seeking revenge, but it is impossible to think about it. The audience cannot behave like this in the real world, and if a certain audience with people killing people right in front of us, a real-life mission of terror broadcast should be released to us soon. At this moment, Sudbai's cell phone rang. Sudbai looked at the call notification and saw that it was Fatty. Didn't Fatty already reply and explain to him? Why did he still call? After answering the phone, the fat man's hoarse and rough voice came. By the way, what you gave me was just a photo of the child being hanged. Are there any photos from other angles? I want to see if there are any special marks on the child's hands, or on his shoulders. Did you put that take off the child's clothes and take some photos for me to see? Sudbai raised his head and looked at Chu Zhao. Are there any special marks on the dead boy's body? For example, on his hands or shoulders? When Chu Zhao heard this, he immediately walked into the restaurant. He knew that Sudbai was asking for help from other audiences. He also knew that Sudbai was the only one among the three who had such connections. He and Suner had no audience relationship of their own at all. Network. Soon, Chu Zhao came out with a stack of photos. This is a preliminary autopsy photo. Some specific things will have to wait for the forensic doctor to transport the body back and dissect it. Sudbai took the photos, and the child's clothes were also taken off to check the injuries. The photos were very clear. Suddenly, Sudbai's pupils shrank, and there were a few black spots on the child's shoulders and the palms of his hands, which looked like bruises but were somewhat different from bruises. Fat man, are you still there? Sudbai asked. Yes. There are black spots on the shoulders and in the palms of the hands. They are not very obvious black spots. Oh, sure enough, that's it. The fat man smacked his lips. The murderer is not imitating the Chungching boy case, because the murderer is not a human, but a ghost. He is using his own way of death to attach himself to others. On the body. Where did you see it? Have you heard a song? Fatty suddenly asked. Search and search for friends, find a good friend, salute and shake hands, you are my good friend. He. Feel lonely. Looking for a playmate. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 206. Damn fat man, just talk. You don't have to sing with me here. Sudbai looked at the little guy who was sleeping soundly on Suner's shoulder. How can I play the song to my son in the future? TCH, you still care about this? The fat man seemed very unconcerned, and then kept making a squeaking sound with his mouth. He must be eating something, chewing food while talking on the phone to Sudbai. Why didn't Terror Radio issue me a real mission? Sudbai asked, but he remembered that Wang Shui's case had a real mission last time. Oh, maybe the terrorist broadcast thinks this is just a small incident. As you know, people are dying in this world all the time. The death of some people may cause turmoil in the current situation, and the death of some people is not good for the general public. It's no different than a dead cat or dog on the street. Well, I mean, who knows what terror radio is thinking in its mind? Of course, there is another possibility. Maybe the real mission has been released, but it is not Toyo. That ghost, according to you, is a child. Well, it should be under 15 years old. However, I can actually give you a suggestion. If you really decide to get involved in this matter. The fat man began to drink the soup. I really like pork ribs and winter melon soup, nourishing and nourishing. Subai smiled and said, if a child dies in that way in front of you, I don't believe you will remain indifferent. Oh my God, Abai, are you possessed by Moses? It turns out you also have a side of the Virgin. Well, don't tell me that you used to treat everyone in the story world as NPCs to kill. Okay, you're right. If this happened to me, I don't think I would care. After all, a 1-year-old child, but it didn't happen in front of me, out of sight and out of mind. Who calls me lucky, right? Tell me, Subai said. Okay, promise me something, the fat man said while wiping his mouth. Explain. Kill that bastard for me. Don't let him go to any legal trial in the end. Kick him first and then crush his heart. You mean, there is another person behind this? Sure, a person who raises ghosts. Don't you understand what I say? What an obvious thing. That ghost is here to find friends. If it had the ability to kill everyone, the horror broadcast would have been I will issue you a realistic mission and then give you a chance to gain favor. I guess that ghost is just a thug, and the person behind him is the one who really does the work. But, some ghosts can cover the eyes of ordinary people, including electronic cameras. Okay, thanks fatty, I owe you a favor. No, this isn't a debt of gratitude. I can't stand the scumbag who kills babies. I think it's a good deed. Ha ha ha, what a god. Subai hung up the phone and looked at Chu Zhao and Suner. I found out some clues. Someone raises ghosts and kills people. Raising ghosts to kill people. Subai pointed at Chu Zhao, didn't he just meet a ghost? Chu Zhao's expression changed, but he didn't say anything. Suner lightly poked Subai, signaling Subai to pay attention to his words, but Subai just smiled and didn't feel that he was deliberately poking Chu Zhao's wound. In fact, no matter whether Chu Zhao really walked out, whether the shadow of that incident is fake or not, it only concerns Chu Zhao himself. In the future story world, there will be many traps for the listener's spiritual loopholes. If Chu Zhao never gets out, he will become one of his Achilles' heel. If we rule out purposeless killing for the time being, then the police should be able to get clues by investigating the deceased's social network. The waitress should have discovered something, or she saw the true identity of the murderer, the man who raised the ghost. Face. By the way, the kid can cover his electronic eyes, so the Skynet system that your police are so proud of may be of no use to him. After Subai finished speaking, he motioned for Suner to get in the car, then started the car, waved to Chu Zhao, and left immediately. On the way, Suner asked with some confusion, just leave Chu Zhao there alone. Subai lit a cigarette, controlled the steering wheel with one hand and held the cigarette with the other. After blowing out a smoke ring, he yawned, send the little guy home first, and then we'll go out again. Any clues? No, why didn't I tell Chu Zhao if I had a clue? Actually, Subai, I'm also curious as to why you care so much about this matter. Suner was a little confused. Don't get me wrong, I think that you and others, we actually. Do you think I'm overdoing it? Subai asked. Suner nodded. Haha, think about it, if I had left the little guy there to be taken care of, and then we went to eat, what would have happened? Suner stopped talking. She could feel Subai's concern for this child. Suner didn't know whether the child was Subai's biological flesh and blood, but Subai completely regarded him as his own son. So, maybe because of my misunderstanding at the time, the child hanging in the bathroom stall now is not one, but two. Subai turned his head and looked at the sleeping little guy. Back then, after Monk Kilu informed Gyatso of the situation, the child moved his tender body to the cliff by himself, and took the initiative to enter the demon cave, just to save Subai. Subai owes him a life. At this time, Subai was like a tiger whose tail had been stepped on, and the little guy was Subai's reverse scale. Subai would kill anything that was detrimental to the little guy without hesitation. This is a father's right and a father's responsibility. After returning home, Subai held the little guy in his arms, unlocked the door, and went up to the second floor. The lights in the bedroom are on, Jixiang is lying on the desk, and the lamp is on. This cat has really been fascinated by this painting recently. Subai put the little guy on the bed, then walked up to Jixiang and touched Jixiang's tail. He didn't eat anything for dinner. You can prepare something to eat and drink for him later. I have something to take care of, so I'm going out first. After Subai explained this, he walked out of the house and got into the car again. Where are you going? Suner kept sitting in the car. Go find the murderer, Subai said. The murderer, Suner said in surprise, didn't you say you have no clues? Just because I don't have any clues doesn't mean that others don't have any. Subai turned on the phone, and the picture of the child being hung appeared on the phone screen again. Some details and places may not be noticed by others. Of course, even if you care, you won't know what it means, but Subai knows it because the knotting technique and even the material of the rope are all things Subai has just tried. Subai took out a business card from his pocket. He didn't expect that he would have to go back to that place so soon. Did he have 24 hours? He drove back to the prince's building and called Ying. The phone was turned off. Subai didn't know if Ying was still in the studio now that it was night. He and Suner got on the elevator together. After reaching that floor, Suner got off the elevator first, but Subai didn't move. His eyes swept over everything outside the elevator with a calm look. This is not the floor we want to go to, Subai said. What? Suner couldn't understand. Come back, Subai said to Suner. Suner returned to the elevator. It seems that we have found the right place. Subai slowly closed his eyes, and immediately, his body began to slowly wither. Suner, who was watching the scene next to her, began to breathe a little faster. Fortunately, she was mentally prepared. But seeing Subai turn into a zombie right in front of her, it was still hard to accept. After all, she and Subai had known each other since childhood, and their understanding of Subai was somewhat fixed. The monk once told Subai that the evil spirit of zombies can break through some barriers and illusions, just like a calm pool of stagnant water that has been disturbed. Subai's evil spirit began to arouse, and a scream belonging to a child came out. In a corner of the elevator near the buttons, a 13-year-old child was curled up and shivering. Obviously, because of him, everyone who wants to take the elevator to that floor will encounter a ghost wall. Subai stretched out his hand and shook it, but the child was still caught by Subai. Evil energy and ghost energy have something in common. The child had a pleading look on his face, looking very innocent. At the same time, he kept waving his arms, indicating that many things had nothing to do with him. He didn't want to kill anyone, he just wanted to find friends. However, Subai still squeezed hard, and the evil energy burst out, directly smashing the kid in front of him. It's just a ghost, not an actual ghost. Subai, who had returned to normal, took a deep breath to drive away the fatigue, and then pressed the elevator floor button again. Then, when the elevator door opened again, Subai walked out and went straight to the room. Kicking open the office door, Subai's pupils shrank suddenly. He saw Ying Yinger still sitting at the desk, but covering her lower abdominal wound with both hands, her face pale, and on the other side of the curtain, there is a figure belonging to a man, who is playing with the SM props that are very cute and friendly in his eyes with a look of intoxication on his face. When Subai came in, the figure seemed a little surprised, but he didn't panic too much. He just clapped his hands gently. Immediately, figures belonging to children slowly appeared on the office wall. A popular nursery rhyme began to be sung quietly. Suner pulled out her gun, which surprised Subai. She could actually equip a gun at will? At the same time, he reached out and pressed the muzzle of the gun in Suner's hand. He is not the murderer. Subai stopped Suner's movements. The figure made a sound like this: "Listen, young man, just now I sensed the smell of zombies suddenly appearing in the elevator. I thought a real-life version of Dead Rising had appeared."